Thank you all for coming today. We're delighted to welcome you both online and in person for today's Digital Humanities Hangout. Our presenter today, as you can see, is Professor Patricia Murrieta Flores, who is the co-director of the Digital Humanities Hub at Lancaster University and also the creator and organiser of these wonderful DHangouts. In terms of her research interests, she's predominantly focused on the investigation of different aspects of space, place and time, using a range of technologies that include geographic information systems, machine learning, corpus linguistics, etc. So we're going to see today how these computational tools and methods can be applied to the study of history, as we hear about Patty's newest project, which is Unlocking the Colonial Archive, Harnessing Artificial Intelligence for Indigenous and Spanish American Collections. So Patty, the floor is yours.
Right, thank you very much, Catherine. Well, first of all, thank you for attending the session today. I'm quite excited because I think it's the very first time that I'm going to be speaking at the DH Hangouts. You know, I think after already almost 2 years of running these events, kind of like in response to the COVID situation. So I feel quite fortunate to be with you today. And so today what I want to do is to share a project that we are working on called Unlocking the Colonial Archive. And we started this project in March this year, and we are still in the very early stages of it, but we have carried out already some work, and I want to share with you what we have been doing and also what we are planning to do in the next few years. So the Unlocking the Colonial Archive very much started because we had been working on this other fantastic project called Digging into Early Colonial Mexico, and in which we have been focused on studying this really interesting historical collection called the Geographic Reports of New Spain. And this collection is quite a large compilation that contains 12 volumes of 16th century historical primary sources. And in that project, what we wanted to do was to figure out ways in which we could identify, extract, and analyze information through computational means from this kind of collection that contain very large volumes of information. Now, we were quite successful in the sense that we started to design methods combining machine learning, vortex mining, annotation of information, and also mapping, for instance, the geographies mentioned within this corpus. And we even ended up with an excellent software prototype for geographical text analysis that we are still debugging, testing, and so on, but that in principle will be ready, as we promise, at the end of this year. So we designed the Digging into Early Colonial Mexico project when we were thinking about it, and when we put this particular collection at the forefront of it, we were quite cheeky in a sense, because we, in the selection of the source, we knew that we have skipped in a way some of the most challenging issues that an historical source can actually pose in terms of trying to implement automatic and semi-automatic computational approaches to extract information from it. So this is to say that this collection has been already edited, has been already transcribed by expert scholars, and this has been already made available in an electronic format, right? So with the Digging into Early Colonial Mexico project, we took this very large collection as a starting point, and we used it as a pilot to test a series of methods that will allow us then to carry out the mining of data in different ways and to do analysis in a big data style, but also in a way that could exchange between close and distant reading. But we were only able to implement all these approaches or these computational methods because we have avoided, in a way, this one of the most difficult challenges that we usually have just to access primary information within these documents, because for those of you that have worked on historical material, will be very easy to recognize that an already transcribed and expert edition of thousands of pages in electronic format is already gold, right? Because more often than not, what you have to do first is to work with handwritten documents and not only chase the location of these documents and gather, data that can be scattered in multiple archives within different conditions, possibly different countries as well. But also, once you have obtained a copy of these documents, you, of course, need to acquire the skills of paleography, do the transcription yourself, and make it then available to the public or to yourself, right? Or use it yourself. And so this is just to then start to think about the information that you have within these documents, right? So in the Unlocking the Colonial Archive project, we wanted to take this kind of a step back and address head-on some of the most important challenges that historians and historical archaeologists usually face in accessing Spanish and Indigenous American textual and image collections that are held at cultural institutions. And we wanted to take advantage of some of the latest developments in artificial intelligence in order to do that. And what I want to do today then is to tell you about this project, some of the things that we are doing within, and some of our advances as well. But before I do that, let me just present you as well some of the amazing people and institutions that we are working with. So the project is led by three main partners. So this is Lancaster University, the Lilas Benson Collection of the University of Texas at Austin, and Liverpool John Moores University. So the project is funded by the AHRC from the UK and by the National Endowment of the Humanities from the US. And we have also a really fantastic consortium of international universities and industry as well. So we have, for instance, the National School of Anthropology and History, the National Autonomous University, and the Meritorious University of Puebla, all from Mexico. We also have the University of Alicante from Spain, and from industry, we are working with our partners, TACDOC, Lucentia Lab, and Transcribus. And we also have quite amazing advisors working with us. And I really want to make a special mention of some of the fantastic PhD and other students that are collaborating with us. These are Mary Newman, Christian Torres Gutierrez, and Angel Aguilar, among others. Right. So in terms of the historical background, I can say perfectly fine with confidence that the Spanish Empire controlled the majority of the Western hemisphere lands and people for more than 3 centuries, right? And if you think about this, the administration of the Americas dependent, but also resulted in the production of very astonishing amounts of written and printed documents. And these were produced by royal notaries, indigenous scholars, artists, as well as printers, right? So we have that from the end of the 15th century to the 19th century, when the American countries become independent, the Spanish Empire very much managed to produce millions of documents related to the colonies, right? And this, at the same time, resulted in the creation of massive archives all across the Americas and Europe, as I said, with millions of records produced in this period. But the problem that we have with this is that despite all this extensive documentation, very much our understanding today of the Spanish colonial enterprise, but also of the situation of the hundreds of indigenous groups living in the Americas at the time is still fragmentary. And there are many multiple reasons for this, but especially because of the inaccessibility of the materials within colonial archives. So among the challenges that we have, and I already mentioned this, we have that scholars or anyone that is actually interested in having a look at these historical sources has to decipher, first of all, kind of like archaic penmanship, obscure writing conventions, and many times encounter, for instance, unfamiliar indigenous imaginary as well. And all of these require trained eyes, right? So the main objective of the project is to use artificial intelligence technologies to automatically convert these unreadable archive, right, into accessible data. Now, I'm saying this in a quite grandiose way because in reality, this is more easily said than done, right? And so there are a bunch of different challenges behind this idea, and of course also behind every technology that we use, but we truly hope to make a difference with this project. So the project focused mainly on 3 areas of research, and I'm going to be talking a bit more today about the first one, simply because it's the one that we have been developing in the past few months. And so the first area is aiming to expedite the transcription of Spanish and Indigenous American documents using a technology called handwritten text recognition. Then the second area will be aiming to carry out the identification and linking of information within this corpora using natural language processing techniques and link open data models. And in the final and third area, we are aiming to facilitate the automated search and analysis of pictorial elements in the colonial archive through computer vision approaches. And so the final idea behind this is to design and very much also to test reproducible workflows along these 3 areas of research and to implement these in cultural institutions such as archives, but also potentially also with museums and galleries and augment how these very much provide access to their collections. And so these approaches, of course, will have direct impact not only in the amounts of data that researchers that are interested in the history of colonial Latin America can have access to, but also on how humanities researchers can undertake also digital scholarship within these archives. So in order to do this, we are working with 4 different collections. So one is the Fondo Real de Cholula, which is the only extant archive belonging to one of the 9 Indian republics of New Spain. And this collection is incredibly important because it holds more than 70,000 manuscript pages documenting the lives of Indigenous, Spanish, Black, Mestizo, Creole, people in financial, judicial, and administrative records. And so we are particularly concentrating in this case in the collection between 1571 and the 1700s. Another collection that we are working with is the Lilas Benson manuscript, which include holdings of 275 manuscripts dating from the 16th century to the 17th century. And this is also quite an interesting and crucial collection because it includes quite different type of data to the previous collection. So it has genealogical and census data on the early colonizers of New Spain. So people that arrived between 1529 and 1550s. And it also contains manuscripts of Nahuatl history, so the histories of the Aztec, doctrinal materials as well, correspondence, the books of professions for religious orders as well. And if that was not enough, it also contains the original geographic reports from New Spain, which is this 16th century collection that I was telling you about before, and which is also considered one of the most important historical sources for the study of the first century of colonization of America. And we are also working with the collection called the First Books of the Americas, and this includes 110 of the 135 first books printed in the Americas between 1543 and 1600s. And this collection basically includes administrative and religious books, as well as dictionaries, grammars, and illustrated doctrinal materials as well in various indigenous language. So this includes, for instance, Huastec, Nahuatl, Mixtec, Otomi, Purépecha, Zapotec, among others, right? And finally, we are also working with the Mapilu collection, which is a holding from the National Archive of Mexico, which basically includes 334 indigenous maps ranging from 1550s to the 1800s. So as you can see, we have, plenty of material that we know that is available to a certain extent, but that is still difficult to access, not only because of the formats in which they actually exist, but also because of the highly specialized knowledge that it requires in order to study, right? So at the moment, we are working on the first research area, which is very much leveraging handwritten text recognition for colonial Latin American documents. And this is quite an interesting challenge because the idea behind it is to expedite through computational means the transcription of the documents in these collections, which are written in different languages, in specialized scripts as well. And they, of course, contain the favorite of every historian, quite obscure abbreviations, that change over time. Of course, there will be always need, I think, for, paleography experts, right? So I'm not saying that this will solve all of our problems, but what machine learning can do is very much to accelerate substantially this very time-consuming type of work, and this is great, right? So if you have never heard of handwritten text recognition, chances are that you have actually heard about optical character recognition, because it is the technology that nowadays allows you to take an image, such as a PDF, and convert that into running text that you can then copy-paste, for instance, into any document type, such as a word processor, right? So OCR, or optical character recognition, is a technique derived from computer vision, and that has made it very much to the public realm because of its great usefulness, right? So handwritten text recognition then is a parallel development to OCR, but that focuses on transforming handwritten text into machine-readable text. And the way that this is done is actually quite interesting. So traditional techniques focus on segmenting the characters for recognition, basically applying algorithms in a recognition engine to identify the corresponding character, right? But more modern or state-of-the-art machine learning models, basically what they are doing, or what they are able to do, is to learn visual features, right? And so they use methods which basically apply convolutional neural networks that extract visual features over different overlapping windows on a text line image. And then a recurrent neural network will be used to produce character probabilities behind, as you basically see in the screen. Now, in order to decide which character is which, the technology basically depends on the data on which this model has been trained, right? So this technology, I have to say, has been very much developed for tools such as the stylus pen, right, that you use in your tablet or in your phone. And so the characters and the spelling and so on, on the training data sets that machine learning uses for this particular development has been traditionally modern versions of the language, right? And so very much focused on Western and European languages. So you have models that work fantastically well with my handwriting, which is, awful, by the way, but that tools like Google Notes, for instance, can perfectly fine identify and then transform into a type character. But in here, we basically encounter the first problem with documents that, even if they are in European languages like Spanish, they are in the 16th century variation of it, and we haven't trained the models to do this automated recognition with these variations of language. Now, another problem that we encounter with Spanish and Indigenous American documents is that they might use a combination of 2 or 3 languages at the same time, so including mixes basically between Spanish and Latin, Nahuatl, Mixtec, or combinations of those or some others, right? Another interesting challenge is the fact that they might combine text with image. So pre-processing of the documents need to happen basically before you even think of running or training a model. And as we also mentioned at the beginning, different types of calligraphies also pose different challenges. Now, in our particular case, we can to a certain extent classify these documents by their different calligraphies, but there are also challenges to this, right? And I'll explain this in a second. And so the types of calligraphies you'll see here basically develop over time, and they tend to be relatively constant because they are producing a setting that requires so. So this is to say that they were produced in the context of notaries, legal proceedings, in court, and so on, right? So, but the historical developments of these calligraphies is actually quite interesting, right? But I'm not going to have time to go into them. But in essence, their creation corresponds very much to the necessity or the requirements to record massive official procedures. So there are styles that are defined and you can actually use to do machine learning behind that. So we are preparing models for 5 main types of calligraphy. So these are letra gótica, with characteristics such as letters with angles and shortening of strokes. And the one that you see here is a sample of one of the works of Fray Bernardino de Sahagún. We are also training models in letra cortesana that has basically is characterized by thin strokes, tight words, quite abundant ligatures as well, and words that are enclosed in this kind of like curved stroke. Another letter that we are, or another calligraphy that we are training for is letra procesal, that is usually uses this kind of like very exaggerated italics. They are equal letter height and they have few abbreviations, long strokes, and some special characters for some letters. We also have procesal encadenada, which is similar to the previous one, but it has its own characteristics. And this is, in fact, probably the most difficult to read because capitalization at this point disappears. There is no visible punctuation. There are few abbreviations, but they are not normally identifiable. And there is normally one running stroke per line. So is the economy, let's say, of writing. So they are just, doing a full sentence just in a row, right? Or a full, line just in a row. And finally, probably the easiest one then is, it derives from Humanistica, is called Italica Cursiva. And in here, the letters and words are really clear. They are quite well defined. And there is a kind of like a preferred inclination to the right. And there is differentiation between thin and thick strokes, right? So there are particular characteristics that we can use as well for identification within this calligraphy and then the use of these models. Now, despite of these calligraphies having these recognizable characteristics, there is still some variation, right? So we have different hands, and it might be also the case that you have a combination of these styles within one document, right? So you might have that escribanos will actually write in one type of calligraphy and then change into another for a number of reasons, whether they were tired or something else, right? So there are several interesting complications in this case. But what we are doing in the project is to generate training data for each of these styles and then obtain models that will allow us to do the automatic transcription of the documents such as these ones. And of course, to do this, we have to begin with, just to carry out the paleography of a sample of these documents and then do iterations to refine or improve the models basically according to the results that we get. Now, in terms of the technology that we are using, we partner with Transcribus, which is handwritten text recognition software that emerged from a European project called Read Transcriptorium, that is now a cooperative society. So Transcribus is actually quite interesting software because it was specifically developed for the transcription of historical documents, because you have many different tools out there to do OCR and to do handwritten text recognition, but rather modern in a way. And the platform, I will say, is not only easy to use, but it also has all the kind of components that you might want for regular transcription as well. So even if you are not going to do handwritten text recognition behind it, it has many advantages just to do the transcription of documents. And so in essence, what this tool allows you to do is to import the documents that you might want, and then you can do that in different formats. And one of my favorite features of Transcribus is that you can import, for instance, a document from an online linked data library. So the British Library, for instance, the majority of the libraries nowadays have what they call a IIIF manifest. So they put that resource basically online, and you can just import this into Transcribus without even to have the document in your actual computer. So you just do the call for the IIIF manifest. And then once you have the document in Transcribers, you can run what is called a layout analysis, which is basically dividing or identifying what are the components within the page. And then you are ready to go, for the transcription. And then from there, the model only requires to do just further steps. So it is really, really fantastic in many different ways. Now, at the moment, we are in the process of transcription of documents for the 5 models that we are creating. So although we don't have yet any results on this yet, we hopefully will have something at the beginning of next year, right? And so as part of this process, we are also organizing a series of interesting training events. So for instance, we are about to start actually our first Digital Humanities and Paleography Institute for this fall, next month. And we will repeat this next year because we had around 300 applicants only for this one. And so of course we cannot accommodate that many people, but we will repeat this course in the years to come. Right, so this is what we are doing in this stage of the project. And the next stage, we will start, so the second stage of the project, we will be starting it next year. And what we are aiming to do with that is to take a next step, thinking about what happens when we obtain now all these wonderful transcriptions, right? So let's imagine that you have now all this data available. So in the last years, with my research project here, with my research group here at Lancaster and with the Digging into Early Colonial Mexico project, we have been working on the identification and extraction of information from very large volumes of textual collections. And we have been doing so through the idea of using also machine learning to train models to automatically identify concepts that might be of our interest. And we did this particularly as a pilot with the geographic reports of New Spain that you see in the screen at the moment. And we designed first an ontology, or rather we took categories from an ontology and created a training data set where we annotated concepts with the platform of our partner called Tacto. And what this other platform allows you to do is to tag any kind of document. Of course, this has to be done with machine readable text, and to train also a model behind that allows you then to automatically tag any previously seen document, right? So you create a model where you say, right, so these are the concepts or these are the words that I'm interested on. You train machine learning behind that, and then you can put then new data into it, and it will do the automatic tagging for you. And this is quite interesting because then you can not only carry out further analysis in a big data style with this information, but also identify patterns at large scale with other tools and with other methods using, for instance, corpus linguistic techniques or geographic information systems and things like that. So just in this example, for instance, we have all the plants that are mentioned in this document, and they are being identified as such, right? So if I wanted to identify a plant that serves as a specific remedy, let's say for the 16th century, and how this is being spoken about in this very large collection of documents, I can actually do so. And so in terms of analysis, this opens quite a large possibility to carry out all sorts of studies. For instance, you could do network analysis, sentiment analysis, all sorts of really interesting computational approaches to this. And of course, you can also attempt to solve or think about different historical questions using this very wide number of historical sources that previous to the development of this kind of technique has been really impossible. And finally, the last area of research for the project, and this is probably the most experimental one, we will be using computer vision techniques to teach the computer how to automatically or how to semi-automatically recognize elements of important pictorial documents. So I think I was telling you at the beginning that the American colonial archives usually contain documents that were produced by indigenous writers and paintings. And so before the arrival of the Spanish, the indigenous cultures of America, particularly those of Mesoamerica, had developed a pictorial form of writing, right? So there were entire libraries with books that we now call codices, but the majority of them were basically destroyed during the conquest. But we still have some of these codices anyway from before the arrival of the Spanish, but the tradition of writing by painting very much continues into the colonial period. So we have many colonial codices, in fact, but also we also have thousands of documents that will eventually merge the indigenous pictorial tradition with the European one. So wonderful maps with this mixed tradition basically emerge, accompanying, for instance, collections like the Geographic Reports of New Spain and many other legal proceedings, right, that were created in the process of territorial shifting and so on. And so in this particular case, what we are aiming to achieve is to help the researcher in the process of identifying things like toponyms and symbols, among many others, right, within these pictorial documents. And in a way, with this particular research area, or the idea behind this, is quite similar to what we do with text. So this is to say that we have the potential to identify, but also to carry out cross-reference from very large, in this case, image collections. So next year, we are going to release a call actually for our research associate to work with us in some aspects of machine learning with this particular research area. And so I can hopefully update you as we go with it. Okay, so I'm just going to leave it there, but please feel free to contact me. And if you want to participate with us in the creation of these resources, but also in this research, I will be delighted to hear from you. So thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Patty. That was fantastic. Oh, it's really, I don't know, it's really fantastic to see, especially where it's going from the Digging into Early Colonial Mexico project, so what it's taking forward and what it's fantastic. And I mean, especially with like the material this is working with, not only the content of the material, but the quantity. It's going to be incredible to see like how not only how you go about trying to extract all this information, but then actually what comes out at the end. It's fantastic.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I'll be happy to answer any question you might have, or to expand on anything that you might find of interest. Right. So could you hear that? No. So Maxine here is basically asking where are all these materials held? So yeah, so we have a variety of archives. So the majority of them, particularly the collections that we are working with, they are held within the Lilas Benson collection, which is at the University of Texas at Austin. The other part of this collection is held in Mexico. So the Fondo Real de Cholula is in Mexico, and then the Mapilu collection is in Mexico as well. So we have like scattered information everywhere. And it also ranges from already digitized material. So these are handwritten material, but some of them are already digitized. Some already are in microfiche and, kind of like these formats that we need to deal with. Right. Oh, sorry. I think I cannot hear you, Catherine. You are mute.
Yes, apologies. I was going to ask if Ben wanted to read his question out to you, or you can, I don't know, whatever you prefer.
Yeah, I can see it here.
Oh, he has no mic.
Right. So Ben asks, might you be able to, in the future, combine the image and HDR for documents with text and images? That is a really fantastic question, Ben. Yes, I think we can already. in the case, because they are very similar technologies in different ways, that seems a contradiction, but it's not. You can actually, because it is computer vision at the end of the day, you can actually already read things like glosses in the maps. So, you know, like the maps that I was showing you before might have not only symbols and geographies and so on, but might also have glosses in Spanish or indigenous languages as well. So definitely, yeah, it's not in the future. We are actually combining it already. Now, if your question is more gearing towards whether we are going to be able to combine, you know, then analysis of these things, I think we need to think about that. How can we actually create databases behind that actually relate one thing to another? So what I mean by that, and this is one of the reasons why we are using link open data, is that we want to be able to identify within these documents particular pieces of information. And in the pictorial documents, for instance, we might want to identify those as well. But because they are not text, but actually areas, right, in a kind of picture, you will need to do probably annotations within that picture, or to say, right, so this corresponds to a toponym, right? And once you have that information, then you could actually then connect, right? So you could actually do queries like, give me, you know, all the instances, both in maps, but also in text collections that talk about a particular place. So Mexico Tenochtitlan, for instance, right? And so you could extract all that information. So we are gearing towards that. And this is the kind of like, this is the component, let's say, of big data that we are talking about that in the future will be enabled through this kind of process. Yeah. Right. Right. So could you map the image into the link open data, or have image-to-image links in a link open data if the image recognition was good enough? Ah, right, knowledge graph. Yeah, okay. Yes, you could. Yes, definitely. Yeah, I see what you mean, Ben. Yeah, I think you could. So could you map the image into? Yeah, okay, image to links, yes, okay, so like a knowledge graph. Yes, definitely, you can. I mean, at the end of the day, that's what link open data facilitates, right? So to make these connections between different bits of information. So it is possible, and I think it is being done already. I need to have a look at how people are doing that, but I'm pretty sure there are projects doing that already.
Hello. Right. Shall I jump in? I was going to ask a question that's kind of similar on this, around the images, even though I know the majority of the presentation was focused on the text. But I'm wondering, because the images are even less standardized, right, than the text that you're dealing with, what kind of problems or challenges, or how would you foresee overcoming the challenges around interpretation? So say you've got two different glyphs that one person may argue are meaning the same thing, or other people say that it means two different places or something like that.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a wonderful question, because that's a crucial one, in fact, particularly with images, right? And even with text, in fact, when we create, for instance, the ontologies to tag text, and then you put together two different people to tag the same text, even if you are familiar with that text, you might come up with different interpretations of things. So you might say, you know, this is actually a territorial entity, and someone else might say, no, I don't think it is. It's a matter of interpretation, right? So you do have to get to certain agreements in order to move forward, to be able to, you know, train these data sets and so on. But this is precisely, I think, where very much recording the ways that you are doing things and being very honest about how you record things, enter into the picture. That is with text. Now, with image, I think that's even more difficult for a bunch of different reasons. And this is the reason why I said that this last part is highly experimental, because we haven't done so. Nobody has done it before. And I think there is enormous variability, not enormous, but there can be actually great variability in terms of how people interpret different things. So that is one of the reasons why we have this amazing board of experts in, colonial maps and so on, because we want to sit down with them and talk about all these problems before we actually come up with a possible way of tagging information in these maps and, extracting it or things like that. But we are aiming to do several experiments. So one experiment that we already kind of run just to see how it worked and so on was to create from a kind of artistic point of view, how would machine learning will come up with artistic representations if it was fed by data from Mesoamerican times with Google Maps, for instance, right? And this is just an experiment, just to see what it comes up with. And the experiment in reality is not only for the sake of it, it was also to see how much we could actually identify particular features that are common to all the maps. So things like toponyms, features like architecture or roads or things like that. So it was very much kind of answering a particular question, but in a more serendipitous way. And we realized that we could recreate London in a Mesoamerican style. So that was really interesting. Nothing to do with historical research, but really interesting nonetheless. But we did manage to train basically the data set enough for it to actually recognize bits of information that are important for the next steps that we will actually be doing in the third year of the project. So, yeah.
Thank you. That was kind of an evil question, but yeah, it's really exciting.
It's perfectly fine. Yeah, thank you. Okay, so is there any other question? If not, that's really fantastic. Thank you very much for attending. Thank you here as well for attending. Right. Okay, so see you next time then.